Carmelo. We'll have the panelists introduce themselves, and we'll do that again after 1 hour. Our panelists today consist of Scott J. Wortman, Esquire, of the SJW Law Group. We also have Jonathan Doro, the managing partner from Vinteum Software. I have Carmen Rusrock from GRS. She's a regional director for GRS, who's going to talk about how we help during the construction time. And then Lisa Elkin, she's a vice president for Alliance Association Bank. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Carmelo, and you can introduce yourself further and then start with the class. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start the presentation. My next slide is actually my intro. So this presentation is on concrete restoration. It's a primer for property managers and board members. Of course, the property managers get a 1 hour continuing education. It's focused on basically how do you go from a small repair to a complete building restoration. So with that, we'll move forward. The outline is as follows. We'll do a quick intro, talk about how the concrete restoration conversation begins, and then we get into the phases of the project. Assessment, project manual, procurement, and construction administration, etc. And then if we have time, we'll get into examples. I'm not sure how much time we'll have left. A little bit about me. I have a civil engineering degree from the University of Florida. I'm licensed professional engineer with my specialty structural. I'm a licensed special inspector. I'm also a licensed general contractor. I've got special training in from the Construction Specifications Institute with, I'm basically a construction document technologist. And way back, I obtained a building inspector certification and masonry inspector, etc. I actually grew up doing construction, so I have many hours of apprenticeship, building homes and digging footings. And so I've got a really practical background. Of course, the college allowed me to get technical. I've been doing it for structural design for about 20 years, actually 21, over 21 now, and thousands of hours of experience in that. And then of course the concrete repair and building restoration projects is in parallel with thousands of hours of that as well. Again, I'm also a licensed threshold inspector. We've designed threshold buildings. I've been prime professional in projects, and I'm also a GC, so we have done our own design and construction management. Okay, moving forward, going from a visible damage to large-scale restoration project, how does the conversation begin? It usually starts with a visible problem, some concrete damage, obviously, and so the manager or the owner calls us to the site. And so initially, we talk about what is the basis of design. So we assess the size and the scope of work. We look for life safety issues. We discuss options for the condo with the manager and the board. And then we discuss how extensive the repairs are. So we say that for patch repairs, these are relatively inexpensive and require much more regular maintenance. And the work usually occurs every 1 to 3 years. But when we're talking about a larger scale project, we know one is warranted when a multitude of issues arise. So again, continuing the conversation, life safety is very important, of paramount importance, and for our licensing, really it's about protecting the public, and life safety is most important. So when you start talking about the structural elements of the building and what are affected, columns are extremely important. Beams are important, slabs, and then walls. So columns obviously are very important elements. If you have problems with your columns, these are very critical life safety elements, and it kind of tapers off from there. But we cannot do the extent of work that might be necessary when the work is considered to be patchwork. So we start talking about, when to move past patchwork. So there's some points to say that patchwork is not cost effective. When do we consider doing a larger scope of work? When patch repairs are not cost effective, they're not time efficient, and And sometimes moving forward, we consider how does a building repaint come into the conversation? We ask, when was the building painted last? So we're basically putting the pieces of the puzzle together to determine, should we do patchwork or should we move forward towards something bigger? So typically paint cycles are 7 years long. And when we talk about restoration cycles, you know, we're called out to the site to specify patchwork. But the board should really plan restoration projects around their paint cycles. So a major reason behind this is the accessibility to the building, to the condos and the balconies, etc. The upper floors cannot be assessed without swings. Another point about moving forward with something bigger is projects are warranted for 5 years typically. That is, the concrete, stucco, and waterproofing work is typically warranted for 5 years. The warranty work varies a bit, but generally it's 5 years minimum. Okay, at least on our projects, that's what we specify. Paint usually carries around a 7 to 10 year warranty. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Paint usually carries around a 7 to 10 year warranty. However, I've heard paint reps tell me that warranties beyond 7 years is a bit bogus. We do see 10-year warranties, but again, when we're talking about planning out cycles, we assume 7 years, okay? So we aim to scope out work that we hope will last 15 years, okay? So we aim for very thorough restoration work. So takeaway is to aim to do your restoration projects around your paint cycles every 7 to 14 years. And again, one of the big reasons is these are them right here, but accessibility, warranties, paint cycles, etc. Okay, so moving forward with a larger project, why is this needed? I've had presidents and condo board members really complain and stress why is the work needed, and just can't understand why it's needed. So we'll talk a little bit about why. And like I mentioned, life safety issues are extremely critical. You can never have the building, any life safety issues be present, okay? There's ongoing, never-ending patch repairs. The building needs a new paint job. Again, when was it painted last? If it needs a new paint job, you might as well take care of some of the repair work needed at that time because you'll have staging in place. So it's a cost-effective thing. New waterproofing. If you need new waterproofing, you might as well do that, and you have to do the concrete repairs prior to doing the waterproofing. Some more points. The chlorides are a menace to the structure, and constant upkeep and protection is necessary. Postponing the work is not the right decision, no matter who the engineer or contractor is. And there are really no cost savings in waiting to do the work. The association will pay now, or they'll likely pay more by waiting. This is very true. What's interesting is that the damage that occurs does not stop. And we'll talk more about chlorides and how they attack buildings, but the destruction, or the corrosion, I should say, does not end, and it's important for the association to protect the building as much as possible. I've never seen a cost savings in waiting to do the work. It just will get more expensive. Again, it's important to plan the work out in cycles to be efficient. If you're doing patchwork every 3 years, it's not really the efficient thing to do. You might as well nip it in the bud and do it at one time. A cleanup at 7 years, and a bigger project at 15 years. Okay, so the board hires the engineer. Moving forward, we start out with phase 1, where we do the building assessment and we do any testing needed. Okay, so the site assessment includes an investigation of the in-place condition of the existing structure. We use scale drawings to perform the assessment. We'll sometimes take the existing drawings from the original construction, or we'll create our own CAD drawings. We do acoustical soundings to identify the loose concrete. Okay, we'll use a rebar, a hammer, or a chain to locate loose concrete. I'm going to get into more detail here in a few slides as to why we take this approach. And assessment sheets are damage areas and quantity estimates are noted on these, and I have an example of this in the next slide. Again, the purpose of this assessment is really to gain an estimate of the damage. Okay, so we're creating estimate for the of amount of concrete that needs to be fixed, and that allows us to plan out the project. The project ends up being unit price based, and I'm going to get more into detail on the importance of all this information in planning out a project. Okay, so when we talk about soundings, this is a very common technique as we use some type of sounding device. It could be a golf club, a piece of rebar, or even a hammer. I know you're saying to yourself, this can't be, this is extremely non-technical, but believe me, this is commonly used and it's the cheapest route. I'll get into some more info here. So the most common and cost-effective method of building survey is acoustical soundings. Yes, believe it or not. It's a good way of identifying the location of spalls. And spalls, you may have heard, I've heard people say spalding and different things, but really the spall you can look up in the dictionary, and it's defined as chipped, fragmented, loose, and flake concrete from a piece of stone or ore. But you can look that up, and that's basically something definable. But the takeaway here is simple is sometimes better. Yeah, so this is a really simple technique. And again, the purpose of it is just to identify quantity of loose damage. And it's the cheapest way to do it. There are other survey methods. The engineer may choose to use different surveying methods such as GPR, impact echo, or corrosion mapping. But these are much more costly than acoustical soundings, and they don't necessarily provide a more accurate way to quantify damages. In fact, they really are not even useful. And GPR is great for locating rebar, general information on rebar. Okay, if you want to know exact sizes and so on, you have to use X-ray. X-ray is extremely expensive. It's $1,200 a day on average. And it's not what you use to survey a full building. It would cost clearly too much money. But all these are more expensive than acoustical soundings, and they may not provide you with what you're really looking for, and that is quantity of damage. That's the real purpose of it. Impact echo is used to find voids in concrete. It's great for new pours. Where if you have a new concrete column pour, sometimes what you call honeycombing, where there's voids around the rebar, etc. This is great for that. Corrosion mapping is used to locate corrosion in rebar and say bridge decks. This is something you might see more on a DOT project. It's very expensive, and again, it's not simple enough to. It's just too costly for what we're doing in private sector buildings. I can tell you that the engineering fees are very competitive to do the assessments, and there's no way that I can compete using any of these techniques with the costs I'm seeing to do initial assessments. So this has come up a lot when in the process of doing buildings. You sometimes have engineers on staff, on the board, excuse me, unit owners, and they are confused and scratching their head at how non-technical acoustical soundings could be. But believe me, this is pretty much what I would say 90% of engineers are doing out there in our local environment. Moving forward, so again, more sophisticated methods do not always provide enough valuable info to warrant extra cost. Okay, so it can create a much more expensive repair project as it will uncover areas that are not yet spalled, but will eventually spall if not dealt with. That is in the case of corrosion mapping, where you may not have a spall, but it finds the amount of corrosion occurring, and you may use, like I said, on bridge decks, it comes in very handy, where you're mitigating future problems depending on the rate of corrosion. So this is an example markup sheet that we've done on one of our projects. And this is kind of standard. You may see something, each engineer may do something a little different. But this is a balcony. We took the plans and drew it up in CAD, came up with the area so we could note amount of floor area to be removed, etc. We note things like, is there a possible intrusion here? So you notice the circled yes, the Y. Down here we note the age of the doors, or what's their condition. Are there shutters, the shutter location, floor covering. All this has to do with planning out the project. It's information that we use in our bid sheets to plan out the project. Okay, again, repair quantity estimation. So it's very difficult. Determining the amount of damage that exists is one of the most difficult things to do. But strength and durability is a topic. Damage quantities are determined based on structural integrity and concrete longevity and durability. That is, it's more than just spalled concrete. It's how is the spalled concrete affecting the mechanics of the element, whether it be a slab, a column, etc. Okay, why any concrete that is spalled must be removed and replaced. This is an engineering mechanics topic that is beyond the scope of this presentation. I have a slide later on in this presentation where I talk about this a little bit further with slabs. I've had this come up from board members numerous times. Some folks can simply not understand why, if you have a big chunk of concrete missing and your slab or column, why is that affecting the strength of the column and why should it be fixed? So I get into it a little bit further with slabs, okay? The estimate, the actual volume of concrete that requires removal and replacement is always more than what is visibly spalled. We often use ratios such as 1.5, 2, and even 3 times what we see in the field. These are applied to the quantity obtained in the survey. Okay, so again, when we see bid sheets later on in the presentation, we'll take our estimate that was done in the field and multiply it by something. And this is a bit of an art. There's really no science behind it. It's just based on experience. Okay. Very important here is unit price versus lump sum. This is really critical when it comes to restoration projects. I'll get into it more, but concrete repair units, concrete repair work is done in units because it's not a clearly quantifiable number. In other words, a contractor can give you a quote to do 1,000 square feet of waterproofing, let's say on your pool deck. It's because it's measurable. However, because concrete, the spalling is not measurable, we don't necessarily know exactly what that quantity is. It has to be done on a unit price basis to protect everybody. So it's simply too risky for the engineer and the GC to do the work lump sum. Why? The quantities are not known at the start of the project. So we've actually been on a project that went lump sum by the contractor's choice. Okay, and oops, excuse me. And we have the contractor actually got angry at us and attacked us. So after the contractor, we designed the project as a unit price project. He wanted to go lump sum at his own risk. And then when the quantity started going up, the contractor actually attacked me, saying that I was not marking up the building properly. So this is a bit of hanky-panky that could occur in a project that I would not recommend. So I don't recommend doing any kind of concrete repair work on a unit price basis because it can cause problems. We actually have heard of another project where the same thing happened, but the engineer actually was sued because the quantities went from 500,000 to something like 3 million. And not that that's acceptable, but again, it's not something that can be estimated initially. So do not do unit price work on a lump sum basis. Again, it's very critical. And this came up on another project of ours recently, another proposal where the board really didn't understand unit price work, and they're trying to fix our time on the project before the project even started, which in my opinion was really unfair. They were trying to get me to set a fixed engineering fee on a project. The scope was not clear. So it's really important for the board to understand that these projects are not set in stone. It's very likely they can go over on time and budget. And I'll get more into that in a bit down the road here, actually, in a few more slides. So we start talking about design. Why, you know, this ties back into the why of the work. Why is the work needed? So demand versus capacity. And when we're talking about concrete repairs, the demand versus capacity is the main topic. So there's actually a code, it's the ACI 562. It covers restoration and concrete repair. Okay, and it states that capacity must be greater than or equal to demand. And demand is all dead load plus the Florida Building Code live loads. Okay, these are standard. All right. But capacity is very complicated to determine. In most concrete repair scenarios, the steel cross-section loss is not uniform but scattered, and concrete degradation and breakdown can also be questionable. What you have is kind of like a Swiss cheese effect, where you have all these voids. If you can imagine a slab with all these holes in it, you know, and so again, we're not getting into the technicalities of it in this presentation, but it's just a simple concept to say, hey, imagine this was your slab, and before it was did not have these holes, and now it does. And that's basically what's happening with spalling and slab. So clearly, the holes in the, you know, in this case, the Swiss cheese does have an effect on the strength of the slab. So again, the holes affect the capacity, and then the capacity ends up being less than demand, so the repair is needed. And it may not take a lot of spalling for that to occur. Okay. So takeaway, the mechanics occurring in repairs is very complex, and therefore experience in structural design is the most important expertise your building engineer should have. It is something which architects or contractors have no training or expertise in typically. We just did a meeting with another board, and they said that we don't have a lot of damage on our balconies because the public adjuster walked the balconies. And you know, I said to myself, well, is the public adjuster an engineer? And I didn't mention that to them, but you know, what we have here is that's not the right thing to do. So it's important for board members and managers to understand that who's actually doing the survey. A public adjuster knows, I mean, unless they're a licensed engineer and hopefully structural specialty, you know, without that, what do they really know about the structure? That not much. So be careful about who's telling you what. Is it coming from a contractor, somebody that's not trained in structures, or is it coming from a structural engineer? It's very important. Okay, so we talk about corrosion. All walkways and balconies really should have waterproofing to delay or inhibit rebar corrosion. This presentation is really it's really pertinent to all buildings, but this right here is really important, and mostly important for buildings along the intercoastal and on the ocean where there's chlorides present. Okay, and I'll get more into that here shortly. So waterproofing halts the ingress of water and chlorides from the top of horizontal surfaces, thus eliminating the potential for future concrete repairs. If the substrate holding the waterproofing is damaged, as in delaminated stucco or spall concrete, the substrate repairs must be made prior to the installation of waterproofing. And that's what I was saying earlier, is that you've got to, if you need to do new waterproofing, then you need to do structural repairs first. So you tie in your projects with that. Okay, but a takeaway here is that corrosion does not stop. It is slowed down by waterproofing, corrosion inhibitors, etc. This is why waterproofing is so important on balconies. So what happens is if you don't do the waterproofing, you do not slow down the corrosion. If you do it, you know, that stops the ingress of water and chlorides, and hopefully gives your, not hopefully, it does give your slabs in this case more life. Lifespan and durability, another topic regarding repairs. So this is another thing we do when we're marking up and designing a repair. These issues revolve around electrochemical processes that are occurring in the concrete, and basically corrosion processes. Okay, A problem occurs where new concrete is placed next to old concrete. This is called halo effect or anodic ring. Corrosion cell develops, affecting the concrete adjacent to the new repair. So in this photo here, this is the area that was spalled, and this is the area that was loose. And what happened was these hook bars were on the edge. So when they built the structure, you know, this building was, you know, built in the 70s, I believe late 70s. And so this hook bar is right on the edge. You can kind of see it. And so it rusted, clearly. And so this area was spalled. We chipped out the concrete here, and we chipped out the concrete here. However, what would happen here in the near future, maybe a couple of years, is this is where this anodic ring occurs, right in this area, and this area right here wants to spall. So when we're designing the repair, you're better off sometimes taking out this entire area, okay, and removing this bit here, because this has a potential to spall. So when we're designing repairs, it's not necessarily just about the immediate spall area. It's more about what's the lifespan of the repair. We're going to get this repair out to 15 years to benefit the condo. We don't want work required in a few years. Okay, we want this whole thing to last a long time. So again, this ties into the whole quantity estimation. So if we estimated this area here and this area here as a repair, had we not put our contingency in there, we may have missed that. You multiply that times 1,000 locations, and you can see how you know, the quantities can go up and the cost of the project can go up, including time. So again, the International Concrete Repair Institute recommends that if corroded rebar is found, then concrete should be removed around the rebar until 2% of it is clean. Okay, so that is in this case, we got the clean steel, so we meet this guideline recommendation, but if we want to take it further, we would remove this bit here. So the takeaway is, like, you know, your engineer needs to be able to design repairs that are, it's not just removing and replacing concrete, it's, you know, how is this repair going to last in the future? So once we do our assessment and we take that information back to the office, okay, and then we begin our project manual creation. So somewhere in between this process, we'll start reviewing the quantities and building our bid sheet, okay? But this part, so we design our project manual and put the specs together, and we also put the estimate together as a total package. So the project manual has you know, a bunch of different items, title page, table of contents. Our projects, we do a formal 3-part spec recommended by CSI. Every engineer does it a little differently, but I prefer this route. It's kind of more of a formal project manual procedure. But this project manual has general conditions. General conditions are actually provided, recommended and provided by the attorney. These are sections in the project manual where the owner and the GC would put these contracts in there, and maybe Scott can talk about that a little later on if anybody has any questions. Anyway, it's a pretty thorough package. We include CAD details of the work as well, specs on concrete repair, painting, stucco, etc. Table of contents, you can see we have a bunch of different areas or sections, and depending on the scope of work. This is our typical bid sheet. It is, you'll see this on from different contractors, different engineers will do something different, but it's relatively similar. Note the general conditions here are typically lump sum, okay? And the unit price work is down here. It's full depth slab edge repairs, etc. These are all units based on my conversation earlier that they need to be in units because they're not fully clear, okay? Now, Again, these are all items that come up on a typical restoration project, and I like to include them before, not later, so that you don't have any change orders down the road. We try to pick up everything that might come up so the contractor can't come back with changes that are very costly during the project. And then finally with paint, in this case we just have paint in this bid sheet, but you can see that it's lump sum, and that's because it's quantifiable. Okay, so this is a lump sum item, not unit price based. It's really important to understand the difference in how unit price and lump sum affect the planning out of the project. We have typical details in our specs and our project manuals for various repairs. I get into quantity estimation here. It's very important. This is a big item when it comes to restoration projects. Very important because it has everything to do with time and money. Okay, so understand that the engineer cannot know the exact quantity of damage no matter what repair methodology is used. However, quantifying the project is very important as it sets cost of the project. It is directly tied to time. So time and money are important. So if the quantities and costs go up, so will time. So these are dilemmas that I as an engineer have, and every engineer has. So when we're bidding on a job, if we've had this happen where the board loves the engineer at the beginning and likely hires the engineer if that is, if the cost is too low, okay? So they hire the engineer with the lowest estimate and then fires the engineer when quantities are severely exceeded. On the flip side, if the cost estimate at the beginning is too high, the board thinks the engineer does not know what he's doing and he does not hire him or her for the remaining of the project. So they go get a second or third opinion. That comes in much lower, and then they hire that engineer at the lower estimate. That's not necessarily the right thing to do. I mean, maybe the other engineer came in too low and he's not planning out the project appropriately. Okay, so these are very, very difficult for the engineer to determine. Ideally, you want to be perfect, but it's impossible. So we try to find the right number, but just be very cognizant as to what you're seeing here. You don't want to be too low because you have a surprise where your project is estimated at $1 million and it ends up being 2 million. So that means you have to go back and do your assessments, etc. Nobody wants to do that. You're better off being a little high, but not too high, right? Because you want to be protected with cost. So just because your engineer comes in high doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he's doing. He may be more a thorough engineer. Okay. So when we're planning for projects, the engineer does his own contingency in his bid sheets. However, when the property is planning out their project, they need to put in their own contingency into cost. So if, let's say that the engineer came up with $1 million project, you need to add in another 10 to 30% on that to protect yourself just in case things go up, and they often do. Now the takeaway here is no engineer can estimate the quantities, time and money exactly. So I think a lot of managers and board members know this, but I've come across times when it's not exactly clear. So once we finish the project manual and we put our bid sheet together, we go to procurement. Okay, and that's the bidding phase. Okay. So we assemble and distribute invitations to bid to qualified GCs. We do a pre-bid meeting where we walk the site with bidding GCs, and we distribute our project manuals. The manager and the board receive sealed bids plus or minus 10 days later. There's a bid opening. 2 to 3 GCs are shortlisted. Sometimes there's meetings with these guys to discuss more clearly what they're proposing. And eventually a bid is awarded, and then there's contract negotiations with the attorneys to clear all that up. We coordinate a pre-con meeting. We mobilize to create a mobilization date. What I needed to add in there was there's actually a permitting period. So there's actually the contractor submits the contract signed, and then there's contractor submits for permit, and then there's, of course, the mobilization date is after that. The procurement period is short. It's usually not that costly for the board. It's just like an hourly thing. But it's usually done in, I would say, less than a month, 2 weeks to a month. Once we're through with bidding and hired, the engineer moves to construction administration and special inspections. This is typically the scope of work for the engineering that's done out there in our local market. I'll get more into that in a little bit though. So the common sequence of work, contractor mobilizes, he sets up the staging and swings. For multi-story buildings and like paint work, let's say, which includes stucco and concrete repairs, it's usually done stack by stack. So they might mobilize, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks at a time, depending on how it's planned out, and then move around the building. That's typically how it's done. But it may vary depending on the time of the project, et cetera. And basically that's means and methods and the contractor's call on how he wants to plan out the job to complete it in the time allotted in the contract. So once the staging is in place, we actually go back out to the site and do a second sounding. So the first sounding is to do the estimate. The second sounding is actually to do the mark up the areas of repair. And you notice here in this project, we had marked up areas of delaminated stucco, which potentially could have spalled concrete behind it. Up here, you clearly see a spall that we had marked up to start an excavation on. So the contractor excavates those areas, then the engineer goes back out to the site to check those areas. He approves, rejects, directs, etc. Whether the excavation extents are okay or they need to be worked on further. Eventually, each repair item is completed and the work moves forward until completion. And then the swings are moved stack by stack. I'm going to talk a little bit here about what services is actually provided by the engineer. Okay, so I've heard some guys call it project management, but that's like an old term. It's actually, that's a new service nowadays. But special inspections are actually required by Florida statutes. It's actually, I have a special license for that. It's a threshold inspector's license. But due to the inaccessible nature of resto projects, building departments will not access swings and therefore do not perform inspections. So it is the engineer's scope of work to be the inspector on the project in place of the authority having jurisdiction. Not all engineers doing resto work are licensed as special inspectors. So the takeaway here, the word inspection means more than the common person might think or know. The task makes up 50% of what an engineer does during the construction phase of a project. The engineer is taking the place of the building department, but still submits weekly reports to the building department. So just briefly, this is, I'll get more into this here as we move forward, but this is one half of what the engineers do on their projects. Special inspections are much different than construction administration, although they're tied in with our scope of work. Concrete testing is important on projects, during the projects. Concrete strength is really important. F prime C is very critical. For ready mix pours on big jobs, we do cylinders that are crushed at intervals to verify that the strength meets the specs. Now, on jobs where back mix is used, which is very often used on concrete repair projects, we don't necessarily need to do as much testing because the bag mixes are tested in their laboratories. So they have a better quality control procedure. Here we're required to do more testing. So ready mix pours can be complicated. Some engineers don't like them. But on big pours or big projects, they're sort of necessary. You have to move toward a ready mix concrete and a little back mix. So here I talk a little bit more about construction admin versus construction management. The engineer's role in the rest of projects is administration and not construction management. Okay. Construction administration includes performing weekly meetings with the contractor, the manager, the property manager, and the board members. reviewing materials being used, reviewing the contractor's work procedures, monitoring quality of work, reviewing and approving pay applications, among other tasks here. Okay. The contractor is responsible for means, methods, techniques, sequences, and procedures. Okay, this is known by the contractor, but not necessarily the board. So the engineer is most often administers the construction contract, but is not the construction manager. The GC is solely responsible for means, methods, and schedule. This has come up on me on jobs where the board does not understand what the engineer's role is and thinks of them construction manager and responsible for the schedule. I explicitly state in my contracts that I'm not responsible for the schedule, so there's no confusion. But take note of that. Some board members do not understand that. It's important that it's clear. So comparing construction administration to special inspections. Again, when we do our proposals or contracts, it's all lumped together, but it's actually a separate item. Okay, coordinating and overseeing meetings, that's CA. Quantity tracking for the engineer, by the engineer, CA. Reviewing and approving pay applications and change orders, that's CA. When we're talking about assessing the structure, inspecting rebar and concrete, excavation extents, being present on concrete quarters, that's special inspection services. Okay, there's a difference. Excuse me. So I'm going to get into this. Is we only have an hour to talk about. This is basically a primer course, and one of the things that comes up on restoration projects, full-scale restorations, are unit intrusions, where you can clearly see in this photo the extent of damage on here at the door, and this is very common. So in this case, this is a life safety issue. The strength of the slab is severely compromised. Okay, I don't think you have to be an engineer to see that. One of the most complex situations on resto projects, because we're going into the unit, and unit owners simply do not want their units intruded into. And there are a lot are cooperative, but there's always some that are, ready to call their lawyer and this and that, not wanting to go into the unit. We have to really put our foot down and make important decisions on what to do. This is a clear case. There are other cases where it's not so clear. It's a little bit more of a challenging call. And I bring back that Swiss cheese example of, when does the engineer make the call to go into the unit? How is the slab strength affected by the spall? That's a very complicated question. Let's see, that's kind of a misplaced slide, but I think I'm going to come back to that. It's just a pay application example that you all will likely see on your projects. Most contractors use AIA pay applications. It's part of the construction administration, though. But this is more in line with what the next slide here is. We might do something like this on our jobs where, on one date, we do our initial assessment. We determine, we definitely know that these two units need an intrusion. Why? This one is the slab is damaged, and then the other one is due to above. So we're having to put up, remove the sliding glass door on the lower unit to do the repair on the slab above. And if I go back to this slide here, it'll come up again in another slide, but I talk about why do we do a full depth repair in lieu of a partial depth? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see here that as the weeks progress, we go from possibles to intrusions, and then finally we end up with our final call of which units are intruded into. So every engineer might do it a little differently. This is something that we do just to track, where the intrusions are at, etc. It's an iterative process. But here I talk about improper partial depth repairs and why we often choose to do a full depth repair in slabs in lieu of patch repairs like this. There are a multitude of issues why we do it. You can see here, I'll go ahead and show you the takeaway. The question, your engineer, if you see a lot of partial depth repairs, they're complicated from a mechanical perspective and not recommended for many reasons. Ask them what their basis of design is, okay? So we've been on many jobs. In this one, we see there was an existing spall. We did an exploratory excavation to find out what was going on at the threshold, the sliding glass door. We learned that there was an old previous repair here. You can see the darker gray concrete and then the older, lighter concrete. Okay, now what happened is the corrosion cell never stopped. Remember what I talked about earlier. So this person in the condo spent money to have this unit intruded into some years ago, could have been 5-10 years ago. And now the corrosion just continued. And look at the lower bar, look at the condition of that steel. So they did a patch job by doing this partial depth repair. Instead of nipping the problem in the bud and doing it right, they chose to do this a patch in lieu of a really thorough repair. And now we had to go back into that unit to do it right. We had to take out this door here and the one below, do a thorough repair underneath the sliding glass door, so that this condo would not have to pay for this concrete repair work for hopefully 15, 20, 25 years, okay? So these are decisions made in the field by the engineer that are very critical. I don't understand why any engineer would do this. There's other implications that don't make sense, like structural mechanics. And I show this little slide here, a simple slide of what happens. It's called horizontal shear. And so there's a bond, this interface receives tremendous stress. It's stress on a horizontal plane. And so you have that stress here at the interface between the new and old concrete. And this bond is very questionable. So what you end up having really is a possibility of this where you have slip. Okay, the boards are not bonded together and you really don't have strength in your cross section. So it's very complicated. To try to run an analysis on this is very difficult. And we're not out there spending weeks thinking about this. We have to make a decision in a day or two. And I don't think I've seen this over and over again where the engineer does this and it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense for various reasons, including respecting the association's time, the money involved, because you just have to come back and redo this work anyway in a couple of years. So we try to do the right thing and nip it in the bud and do it right. It costs more at that time, but it's the right thing to do. Think about that when you're on your project. Ask your engineer and your team why they're doing partial depth repairs instead of nipping in the bud. They may have a lot of kickback from the unit owner. That may be okay on 1 or 2 units on a 100-unit building, but when it's a bunch of units, it's not acceptable. You really need to do the right thing and do it thoroughly. Again, the main thing is not durability of the repair, it's life safety. Is the cross section working the same way that it was intended when it was built? In this case, it's not. So it's very critical. These are more examples of damage, previous repairs that were, not adequate. You can see the patch that was done here, but the corrosion, look at all the corrosion that exists. So we go in, we take all this concrete out and we replace it along the door track. Okay, and then we waterproof on top to protect that concrete in the future, to hopefully carry that repair out 15, 20 years. Okay, change orders are common with concrete repair projects. It's all tied together with what I was saying earlier regarding estimating the work. You want change orders to be down to a minimum. You don't want the project to be too expensive, and you don't want it, of course, you don't want it to be too low either. So it is important to weed out bad or unethical contractors that hunt for extra changes, leave money on the table, as I've heard some contractors say, and this is the truth. You will see that. It's the engineer's job to track quantities. We have seen contractors open up areas beyond what we've marked up just to bill more. We had one contractor, we marked up 20 feet of edge repair, and he opened it up to 200 feet on his own call without our okay, and then he threatened to shut down the job when we questioned what he did and refused not to pay. I've seen it over and over again. There's a lot of guys out there that will try to blow up quantities, and your engineer and your team, your engineer needs to keep track of that and note when that's happening. So expect change orders, but all must be wary of unethical contractors blowing up quantities. We talked briefly here about hurricanes. Hurricanes are extremely stressful and costly. You really only have 3 to 4 days to board up the building. This is a typical detail we use for what we do if the sliding glass door is out. We have to basically install a wood wall in there into the opening to protect the unit. Note down here that what I say in this detail is it's not waterproof, and that there's a potential that this thing would leak if you have wind-driven rain for 12 hours at hurricane force winds. It's not possible that it's going to leak. It's a definite. Question is how much. So it's important for your engineer to have all this called out in his project manual. There should be some type of unit prices for hurricane walls and mobilization and demobilization for hurricane incidents. So takeaways here, we must get the GC to state how many doors they can board up in case of a hurricane. That's really critical. You do not want to take out too many doors and then get stuck if there is one. This needs to be clear and discussed. Again, I've been in, sometimes the contractor will not understand this responsibility and just do whatever. You should have plywood on site and ready at the beginning of a hurricane season, just in case, because if one comes through, again, you only have, suddenly there's a report, and let's say it's a Wednesday, and the hurricane's coming through on Sunday. That means you have just a few days to get plywood delivered to the site and your units boarded up. It's better if you have a pallet or two on site if you know you're going to be taking out a lot of doors. Of course, it's discussed in weekly meetings what the procedure is in the event of a cone coming through. Need to make an important decision on when to move forward. Again, board ups are not waterproof, and neither are sliding glass doors for that matter, which is another topic. But sliding glass doors are not waterproof. A lot of people think that they are, that they're good for, a category 1. They're not actually good for a category 1 storm. Structurally, they are, but not for keeping water out. So that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, sliding glass doors are not designed to resist a lot of water intrusion. So hurricanes are very costly and complicated times. Again, your engineer should have items in the project manual to plan for this in case they do come through. These are example progress reports. Different engineers do different things. I do a report for every inspection. So we go out to the site, we note the inspection date, we note what was done, the stacks that were worked on, etc. And some guys do it weekly, some do it really monthly. Is not acceptable, but weekly reports might be okay. The building departments, from what I've seen, 9 out of 10 are going to want weekly reports. This is an example, a substantial completion certificate. We note this is an administrative certificate, important for the contract to note the start of the warranty. That's really what its main purpose is in the completion of the construction work. And then the final completion certificate is needed by the building department. This is what they're looking for to say, hey, when is the project done? So while substantial completion is more of an administrative document, the final completion, it's also required, or useful to the contract, the construction contract, but is also important for the building department. Note that in this case, the substantial completion certificate is directed towards the owner in this case, which I really should have whited out, but in this case, it's directed towards the building department, you see, and that's the difference, because substantial is more important to the construction contract, and this was more important to permitting. Let's see, Peggy, can you hear me? Or Jonathan?
Yep, we're here.
Yes.
Okay, how much time do we have? We should maybe 5 more minutes, or are we good?
You could go 5 more minutes. Yeah, 5 more.
Okay. All right, so we'll just go through a few examples of repairs. Sometimes we see post pocket damage. What happens is there's shrinkage around the post pockets. Actually, I just looked at a job recently where there's a lot of edge damage. Some of it is probably likely to this. This happens very often, and it's important that your waterproofing comes up to the railing and seals it up, because water gets in there, gets close to the rebar. Once the water and the chlorides get close to the rebar starts to rust and spalling ensues. So it's, you know, it happens over and over again. It's a simple thing, but it's just not maintained properly, and the damage can be very costly. Got to go in, excavate the post pocket, put in new grout, etc. This example of damage, there's a post here. You can see there's extensive spall here, right over the, right below the post. Okay, full depth slab repairs. Again, it's, you know, going down to the bottom of the slab, cleaning the steel and forming up and re-pouring. These are large areas in a garage. Just another example. We may do overhead repairs. Actually, these are full depth. Just another example of full depth repairs and reinstatement procedures. This is using a bag mix. You can see here, it looks like we've done coating already in this. I can see the markups here. We put corrosion inhibitor on the steel, and we went in this case, this looks like the top side, and reinstated the concrete. We need to make sure that it's vibrated properly, that the ratio of water to cement is accurate per the bag mix. A lot of times we'll be on site monitoring that, noting it sporadically to make sure that the contractor is adhering to the call out for the bag mix. Note that very important is water cement ratio. The contractor should not be adding a lot of water to the concrete mix. We talk about partial depth repairs. I know I mentioned it earlier. I don't like to do partial depths, but we'll do them here and there once in a while, you know, in select areas. Let's see. This area I think was over a beam. We did that repair there, and just select areas where we're doing partial depth, but we don't do it too much. These are reinstatements of partial depth repairs. You can see the corrosion inhibitor that was placed on this walkway. Previous repair, that previous patch that was on looks like epoxy that was excavated and repaired. I don't show the curing in here, but there's a curing procedure. The contractor needs to come in and put burlap and water and cover the concrete so it does not cure too quickly. One of the reasons I don't like partial depth repairs is that you can very often get cracks, okay? So we keep our partial depths to a minimum. The slab edge repair, I talked about this earlier. In this case, you can see the post actually right there above the spall area. You can see how we took this is the rusted area, and we took the excavation beyond the rusted area 2 to 3 inches. So this one would have been reinstated, formed up and reinstated. Let's see, this is more eyebrow work, full depth repairs, various repairs there, then more edge repair work. This area that was repaired and stuccoed and patched up. This area here, we're using partial overhead repairs. This was actually a roof above, so we had to do overheads in this case. I do not like to use overhead repairs due to bonding. And again, mechanics. It's not something I do too often. Once in a while, if I need it. In this case, there was a roof above, so we did it. But I selectively do overhead repairs. Very seldom do I use it. And it's primarily a mechanics issue because you don't get full bond of the material up because it's gravity. We got gravity against us, right? The material wants to fall down and not bond to the existing concrete. So in this case, I don't recommend overhead repairs because structural mechanics are questionable and the likelihood of future corrosion spalling repairs is high. Use only where full depth repairs can't be used. In this case, yeah, you might get honeycombing as well, or voids behind the rebar in some cases. Again, more overhead patchwork. Column repairs, gotta be careful with them and shoring when needed. You see a lot of, this is very common in column repairs is the corners rust, the rebar, you know, the steel is on the corner. So you get corrosion at the corner and you have to repair it. In some cases, it's so severe, it's a full cross-sectional repair. Wall repairs. Wall repairs are similar to beam repairs. This is actually a beam repair. So this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like after. You can tell, imagine if you're trying to estimate the damage, like I was saying earlier. That's what was actually spalled, and this is what we had to excavate to get the clean steel. Notice the difference. This is clearly more than 3 times volume. So this is why the engineer has to really, there's a lot of guesswork as far as volume goes. It's very challenging. You see some beam work. In this case, there's some shoring where the beam is at. Shoring slab to keep, take the load off the beam while it's being repaired. Expansion joints, in some cases, these need to be replaced. They dry up and crack. It's an expansion joint that's aesthetic. Sometimes it's not holding water back and it's not as critical a joint. We may sometimes not do them, but if it's part of the building envelope in the interior, then it's really critical because it keeps water out. So that's an important element to think about as well. Sometimes you'll be in a parking garage and see expansion joints that are cracked. And the biggest dilemma there is that you have water leaking onto cars. That's a problem. Some buildings more than others, but it's not as severe as having water leaking into a building where you have inhabitants. It's a whole other life safety issue. This is just an example of a repair we dealt with recently. Delaminated stucco. This is something that we've see a lot of where we have stucco that's not bonded well to the concrete, and so the paint is only good as the substrate is connected to or painted on. If the stucco is loose, it could crack. You can see here. So we aim to remove delaminated stucco before we paint the building, which is also often part of a restoration project. So again, this is another reason why you plan out a project thoroughly with repairs, because you can't do all this work without swings. So you want to do your repairs wrapped around the time when staging is in place. And if you have to go fix, we've done this on different jobs where they have leaks on the walls, and the association has to pay a lot of money to have various areas staged just to go back and fix somebody's window in lieu of fixing a whole stack. So this is could be a whole nother topic or presentation, but on most of our jobs, we remove and replace delaminated stucco prior to painting, etc. Peggy, John,
okay.
Are we good?
Yes, we're good. That's why I didn't want to, I've seen your presentation before, so that's why I didn't want to skip this part with all these pictures. So very good, Carmelo. Did you have any questions from prior that you wanted to answer before we turn it over to Scott?
Yeah, we did have some questions.
Can you take about 5 minutes and run through those questions, and then we'll pass it to Scott, please?
Yes. Yeah, so we had one, which buildings have you worked on and how many, et cetera? I think that's an individual question, perhaps.
Yeah, that you should take offline to a email.
Yep, exactly. What is the best product to fill foundation cracks in ground floor condo? Again, that's a direct question. I can call that person out or email them. So what are guidelines or checklists that a structural engineer should follow when performing a survey to determine the scope of concrete restoration work? I think I answered a lot of that in this presentation. And
Okay.
again, I think perhaps I'd be happy to speak with this person directly to go over that.
Okay, so we'll just ask the audience or the guests to reach out to Carmelo directly. And at this point, I'm going to introduce briefly Scott J. Wortman. He's with the SJW Law Group. And Scott, you wanted to introduce yourself and talk about what your experience or construction law touches.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, I represent approximately 75 condominium and homeowners associations throughout the state of Florida. I've been practicing 26 years. I'm Florida Bar Board certified in the area of condominium and plan development law, as well as Florida Bar Board certified in the area of real estate law separately. And I handle all aspects of an association's legal needs, whether it's their governance issues, reviewing their documents for purposes of proposing amendments, violations, covenant enforcement, collections, as well as our topic today, construction-related issues. In particular, the contract phase, when an association, when a board of directors is deciding to hire a contractor for the purpose of a capital improvement project, a restoration project, or a renovation type project. The contract is an important aspect of the project itself. It lays out obviously all the terms and conditions and obligations. And as the attorney for an association, I have to wear my worst case scenario hat when it comes to reviewing the contract. Typically at the beginning stages of these projects, everyone is excited to move forward with the project. They're anxious to hire a contractor or an engineer, and they want to just get moving with the project. And at times, sometimes the associations may rush through the contract phase of things just to get the project off the ground. This is where I step in and perhaps look to not slow down the process, but just make sure that all the appropriate protections are built into these contracts as the project moves forward, because more often than not, things happen. And more often than not, there's an issue in terms of more work needing to be done, and perhaps pricing changes midstream. And when a board of directors is looking to sell a project, for lack of a better word, to the membership and explain to them why it needs to be done, part and parcel to that is explaining to them the cost. And if the cost of the project changes dramatically, the board of directors has to answer to the membership and give a good explanation. And the determination as to whether or not a contractor can increase pricing on a project is going to be determined exclusively by the plain language of the contract itself. Another big issue as it relates to community association projects, which I've come across and I've dealt with, is the potential liability as involving subcontractors. Typically, an association simply communicates with and contracts with a general contractor, obviously for the purpose of overseeing the project and spearheading it, and perhaps there is just a contractor and no subcontractors. However, just because there is a contract just between the general contractor and the association does not mean that the association may not have liability to the subcontractor. In fact, oftentimes the association and its representatives on the board of directors may not even know who the subcontractors are, may not have ever communicated with the subcontractors, yet somewhere down the road, if an issue arises with the solvency of the contractor and the contractor fails to pay the subcontractor, pursuant to the construction lien law, does have the right to demand payment for the work that it performed at your condominium, at your homeowner association, at your community association for work that it completed. This is even though there's absolutely no contractual connection, something called privity of contract between the association and the subcontractor. When does this type of event take place? Like I was mentioning, midstream, if a contractor files bankruptcy or disappears off the job, which doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and the subcontractors are not paid by the contractor, the subcontractor will look for payment for work that was done from the association. And how does that liability arise? That liability will arise as a direct result of the subcontractor filing a document called a notice to owner. And you may have received something along these lines of, just as an individual doing a home improvement project, if a notice to owner document is sent to you by the subcontractor, and it has to be sent within 45 days of the commencement of the work, that puts in this case, the condominium association or homeowner association on notice of the existence of a subcontractor and the potential liability of the association to that subcontractor. So naturally, the next question is, how does the association protect itself from the scenario where the association just has a contract with the general contractor, pays just the general contractor, which is supposed to encompass payment to the subcontractor. The subcontract and the general contractor rather takes off, or again files bankruptcy. How does the association protect itself contractually in that event? There are two methods, generally speaking. One is in the contract with the general contractor between the association and the GC, provision needs to be added specifically stating that a lien release from all subcontractors must be provided to the association before a progress payment is made from the association to the GC. In that event, the association could be assured that at the time the association makes that payment, that all subcontractors have been paid to date, effectively eliminating the possibility of that double payment scenario of paying the general contractor and later on having to pay the subcontractor for that same amount of work. So careful contract drafting by including that type of provision, that type of language, needs to be built into the contract between the association and the GC. And not so surprisingly, the general contractors tend to resist that type of language because they prefer to pay their subcontractors on their own schedule as they see fit. But it's important that the association hold fast as that requirement, again, to avoid that double payment liability. Another option for the association is to purchase a performance bond. And a performance bond, for all intents and purposes, acts as insurance in the event, in the hypothetical I described, where the general contractor disappears off the job, the subcontractor is holding his hand out for payment for work that he completed. In that case, the surety company who issued the performance bond will step in and pay the subcontractor. However, of course, that's not without costs. And performance bonds on average could add 3 to 5% to the total project cost. And so that needs to be incorporated into the budget. If that's the only option, in lieu of including the contractual provision that I just talked about. So that's an important piece of contract drafting that must be dealt with ahead of time before the contract is signed between the association and the general contractor. Can't tell you how many times, unfortunately, I've received a copy of the contract between the association and general contractor, but it's already been signed. And at that point, it's kind of difficult to modify and amend the contract when we already have a binding contract in place. So once that contract is presented to you by the general contractor, I suggest you provide it to your association counsel, have it read carefully. Oftentimes, they will present the typical AIA document, which is most common and most familiar to general contractors. However, there are required provisions in that form AIA document that do need to be softened to the association's benefit. I may hear from my general contractor friends that I deal with frequently that this is the form contract used by all general contractors and all associations, and it's a balanced contract. And by and large, that is true. But I just highlighted one example of one provision that is not incorporated into the AIA document that does need to be built in, typically done through an addendum as prepared by your counsel. There are a variety of other nuances to the construction lien law that fill up volumes of books in terms of notices of commencement, lien rights of general contractors, as well as subcontractors that we just touched on. It's an intricate area of the law, and particularly the contract itself. And if you have any questions about any of these projects that your community is about to undertake, I believe my email has been presented. I'd be happy to answer those and assist in any way possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. That was awesome. Do we have any questions for Scott? I just had one. I had a question about the surety bond. Is that included in the insurance claim, and does the insurance pay for that at the end of the story if you have an insurance claim?
Well, two separate things. Typically, the contractor is going to be providing comprehensive general liability insurance, and that's actually provided for on some level in the AIA document. The coverage amounts should be increased depending upon the size of the project. And that CGL policy covers an event where a contractor does something that causes damage to person or property, and the liability insurance carrier would cover that type of loss that's sustained as a result of negligence by a contractor. That's separate and distinct from a performance bond, which needs to be separately purchased as in the event that the subcontractor goes unpaid due to the general contractor's disappearance from the job or insolvency through a bankruptcy.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, great information. Okay, with that, I want to turn it over to Jonathan Doro of Vinteum Software. And Jonathan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Scott. And Carmelo, thank you for that fantastic presentation. I appreciate it. One quick little order of business. I have reached out to a couple people who's logged in with names that were not very descriptive. So if you could just, if you're looking to get the continuing education credit, if you could just respond to that message that I sent you with your name and email, just so we can make sure that you get that credit that you're due. But yeah, so my name is Jonathan. I work with Vinteum Software. I'm a managing director there. And what we do is make public-facing websites with secure back-end portals. And while at first glance you might think, well, what's that have to do with construction? Well, a successful, construction project, restoration project, is made all the better through better communication. And that's really where Vinteum Software excels, right? So whether that is, you're starting this project and next you're thinking about paint and you kind of want to shoot out a message to all of the residents and get an idea as to, what the color palette might be. Well, you could go ahead and do that. Send out a a message, give them a couple days to respond, and then we've got some reporting on the back end to let you know what their favorite color palette is, right? How can people get angry at that? So everything from that to, you know, as Carmelo was going through the presentation, he had this segment about construction administration, right? And the importance of, you know, these daily, these weekly updates, keeping everybody informed, making sure that the board knows what's going on, and especially, you know, from there, communicating that to the residents, making sure that people know, and if you send out a weekly update, you're probably going to free up those phone lines from all of the emails and calls that you might be getting as a board member. And not only that, but you want to make the communication and message specific, right? If you're doing work on a low-rise community with 10 different buildings, you don't need to send it to the entire community. Send it to the building that you're working on, and then let the, you know, the buildings that you're going to be working on next week or the following weeks, kind of keep them updated along the way. Also allowing them to, you know, allowing board members and residents to access, you know, some of these documents that Carmelo was talking about, things that might be relevant as far as, hey, if I need to move my car out of the way, you know, if the pool is going to be available, that sort of stuff. Really just allowing folks to easily access information, ensure that there's transparency. A couple other ways that you could do that. One, you know, you want to make sure that your message is concise. You want to avoid jargon, confusing messages. You also want to allow folks to select the communication channels that they prefer. You know, do they want to receive an email? Do they want to receive an SMS, a push notification, that sort of thing? So these are all things that Vinteum is here to help you out with as you're going through these construction projects. If you've got any questions as far as the communication side of things, the management side of things, we'd be happy to help. So again, my name is Jonathan. I'm with Vinteum. You could reach us at vinteum.io. And back to you, Peggy.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jonathan. This is where it's very important, I think, to have a personal or private website separate from your management company. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Elkin. She is Vice President at Alliance Association Bank. And Lisa, I'm going to let you take it from here. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure having you join us today. And Carmelo, that was a great presentation. And in terms of Alliance Association Bank, I'm going to give a little bit of information about myself. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in finance from Iowa State University, and I decided I hated the snow and cold, and I moved to warm, sunny South Florida, and I took a job as an internal auditor at a bank. So that was kind of how my banking career started out. And now 35 plus years later, I'm still in the financial industry. I've been working for Alliance Association Bank since September of 2013, so almost 7 years. And one thing about Alliance Association Bank is you just need to remember that our middle name says it all. We only work with the banking needs of associations. Now, speaking of associations, we're not just talking about homeowner associations, we're talking about homeowner associations, condominiums, co-ops, timeshares, RV mobile home parks. So those 6 industries are really what comprises the community management industry. We don't do any sort of personal banking. We don't do healthcare banking. We don't do legal banking. It's just associations. One thing about our bank is the president of our bank actually used to own a management company, and he understands how unique it is to be banking with associations. So a little bit about our bank. Alliance Association Bank is a bank, but we're a division of a larger bank, which is Western Alliance Bank, which is a subsidiary of Western Alliance Bank Corporation. Our Alliance Association Bank, as a division of Western Alliance Bank, our corporate headquarters are based in Phoenix, Arizona. So although we're based in Phoenix, Arizona, there are about 22 of me throughout the country where all we do is work with associations, the property managers, the board members, people like Carmelo who are finding these construction projects, and we're turning around and we're saying, hey, we can help you finance these. So Carmelo's happy because now the association is being able to do these projects. It's really a team effort too. And speaking of a team effort, if someone contacts me and says, you know, we're wanting to do a concrete restoration project, the first thing I say is, have you spoken to your association attorney? So someone like Scott Wortman is a very important part of the process. The reason being this is we were working with an association. They said, yes, we definitely have the ability to borrow, and we needed an attorney opinion letter, and came to find out that their association governing documents did not give them the ability to borrow. So we had to go back to the drawing board with the association attorney and make sure that the governing documents were amended. Another situation occurred where, again, without really truly consulting their association attorney, they did have the ability to borrow, but they didn't realize they needed an ownership vote and not just a board vote based on the dollar amount. So those are two key things to really make sure you're getting your association attorney involved. Let's say your association attorney's like, yep, that's great. They do have the ability to borrow the money. The next thing would be is identifying and getting what's called an RFP. It's a request for proposal. We have a very streamlined process at Alliance Association Bank where an association just needs to provide a balance sheet, an income statement, and accounts aging. And then we have a single-page loan proposal form. The reason is that we realize how precious time is in a management company and with the board, because you're all getting paid so much, basically zero, but you care about the community. So we're able to turn around a term sheet for review rather than getting all the financials that we would need for full underwriting. Then once the association decides to move forward with us, they go ahead, they sign the term sheet, they provide the origination fee, and then we do the full underwriting. Depending on the size of the loan, if it's less than $2.5 million, we can normally get that done in about 30 to 45 days. If it's larger than that, it may take a little bit more time, but a lot of it all depends on how quickly that we get the documents that we really need. And one thing about associations that maybe, you know, you as a board member may know, property managers may know, but the residents may not understand is, think about it this way, nobody wants a loan. Who wants a loan? Did you want a car loan? No, but did you want a car? Yes. Did you want a boat? Heck yeah, but got a boat loan. So with this, with the association, nobody does want a loan, but look what it's going to do. Let's say you get that concrete restoration project done. I financed a concrete restoration project in Highland Beach, and guess what happened? When that completed, the market value of those units went way up, and now you had some really happy homeowners. Now, did they want the loan? No, but did they want the increase in the property value for themselves? Yes, they did. So with an association loan that differs than a traditional loan is that you actually have no personal guarantee. You don't have any mortgage interest taken in a unit owner's property, and you also have no impact on the resale or the refinance of that owner's property. So you may be wondering, what is the collateral? No, we don't want your swimming pool in your community as your collateral. No, we don't want your clubhouse. But what we will take as collateral are the assessments, whether it be special and regular assessments. Well, speaking of that, if you're looking for a loan, there's some key metrics to really consider. One of them is delinquency. If you have 100 units, we're going to use 100 units as an example. If you have 100 units, you should not have more than 10 that are 60 days or more past due. Because we as a bank, if we're lending you money, we want to make sure we get repaid. And if you're over 10% right now and we get you the loan, it could be a problem getting repaid. The second thing to look at is the liquidity. And a good way to look at the liquidity is to look at your annual budget. So if your annual budget is $100,000 as an example, we want to see that you have at least $20,000 in your bank accounts, because we want to make sure that you're collecting obviously $100,000, but if you're keeping less than $20,000, that could be a little bit of a red flag. Now, going back to underwriting though, I always like to use the two words, which is it depends. There are so many factors that go into the approval for a loan. So those are just, you know, a few of the credit metrics to consider. And when it comes to like why selecting Alliance Association Bank, our bank only does association lending. We have a streamlined approval process, and we truly understand how important it is for the associations to be able to get this financing. And I'd just like to end by saying that I really appreciate the opportunity to be a panelist. If you have any other financing questions, anything I can assist you with, my name is Lisa Elkin. I'm the Vice President for the South Florida region. My phone number is 561-212-2091. Thank you.
Very good, Lisa. Very, very good. Good information. And I was hoping to have from GRS our regional director, Carmen Rusrock, on because she has a lot of experience from her actually on-site manager in a regional position with one of our main clients, which is GL Homes, where these projects, we get in there from the very first start of the first home being built, and we take it all the way through. The last home could be 500, 600, 1,000 homes, and then close it out and then retain that, such as a property like the Bridges that we've had for many years now, 5, 6 years. I'm going to go on and introduce some things about GRS. We have been around for 30 years. I myself personally have an associate's degree in marketing, and I have been with GRS over 2 years now. 15 years in the condo and homeowner association industry myself. And I just want to touch on some other points that GRS, we have 70 managers deep. Not all of them touch construction, but they have done small renovation, overseeing the RFP process, which Lisa mentioned, where the managers will solicit 3 to 6 until you're happy as a board, proposals for your project. This is very important because what we do is we then put it on a spreadsheet and then we identify it according to the various differentials of the proposals. Then you can look at a sheet and clearly see this one does include this one doesn't include that. So all the different things are covered, and then we also have this available and presentable to the banks. And our finance team gets heavily involved with what Lisa was also talking about providing these balance sheets, these income statements, and also who on the aging report we need to be concerned about. Is it more than this 20 that you need? Of course, all of our transition from the beginning of us taking on an account includes reviewing the documents with your attorney. If you don't have an attorney, a lot of times we do recommend Scott. He's been a tremendous support to our company over many years. He knows our owner very well. And the documents are read again prior to a project by the manager, the regional manager, and our regional vice president of operations. With that said, I just want to let you know that if you do choose GRS as a management company, we do have a lot of services besides the day in and day out operations. If our manager at that point is not as strong in construction, we have a lot of backup, like for instance, Carmen as a regional herself, or others on our team. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I think it was a great presentation. We do have some time here for some further questions. Jonathan, do we have any questions that weren't answered that came up on the chat that we can direct to any of our panelists?
Looks like we have one that came in under the Q&A section, and other participants, if you'd like, there is a Q&A section which you could go ahead and send out a message. One was from San Sasser. We started seeing some stucco delamination, and when I suggested to bring you in to put together the scope of work and bid analysis, I guess this is mostly just targeting Carmelo. So sorry about that. Okay. But yeah, it seems like there might be an opportunity for you to provide a bid there for Sam. Is there anything else? Anybody else have anything through the Q&A or send us a chat?
Okay, if not, I just want to say, feel free to send me a specific question and I'll forward it to the panelists if you didn't pick up on their information. And again, my name is Peggy West and my email address is marketsmart03@gmail.com. That's marketsmart03@gmail.com. And my phone number is 561-666-0427. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it, Peggy. Thanks for quarterbacking this. Scott, wonderful working with you.
Same here, Jonathan.
Jonathan,
great job.
Jonathan,
Yeah,
can you
great.
send the updated questions to me? Just make sure I don't know if I saw those.
Let's see. Give me 1 second here. We did get a question regarding post tension. There wasn't much else. That's from Donna. I'm not sure if you could go into a little bit more information on that.
I didn't see that one. I saw another one about post tension curling in slabs, and my response would be that primarily occurs with slabs on grade. It's very rare in post tension slabs, but there may be a possibility, depending on how the thing was designed and some mechanics that might occur, but it's more common in slabs on grade than it is in post tension slabs.
Okay.
Well, maybe they could call you.
Yeah.
And we also got one from Patty Shaw. Pros and cons for seal coating.
Yeah, it's not a full waterproofing, but it protects the concrete. If that's clear, if that's what they're asking, is seal coating it, but it's not as thorough. It's not like a waterproofing. It's not the same. It still can't allow water to get in. Yeah, that would be a short answer.
Perfect. And yeah, I think that's about it. Most of those you touched on during your presentation. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Wonderful.
That's it.
And just a last little note, I'll stay online for a little bit longer. If you are looking for CEU credits, and I sent you a message asking for some additional contact information, if you could just shoot me a message with that, that would be great.
Yeah, Jonathan, please send that list to me with their number, because we'll get that uploaded here in the next few days.
He will.
Will do.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Great
guys.
meeting. Great
Thanks,
meeting.
Peggy.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one. Bye.